Try that with the microphone on. Hey everybody, how you doing? My name is Mac. I'm a sommelier here in Philadelphia, and I have this channel where I try to help people understand what I look for when I buy wine and what things to look for when you're tasting wine. And so today I'm going to talk about two wines. I'm going to start out with a red wine, and this is the Viña Alberdi. This has been a wine that I have drank a ton of so far this year. This is a bottle that I was buying cases of from Astor Wine. I'll drop a link in. This is from La Rioja, Alta. It's a producer, also the name of a location. But these guys are known, they're probably a mid-sized producer. They make crowd-pleasing wines, right? So this is, you see something from them, you can feel safe buying it. It's going to be enjoyable. Maybe not overly complex, but still, solid stuff to drink on a regular basis. This is made with 100% Tempranillo, which is, some Riojas, it's a very common grape to use in Riojas. Some of them use other grapes, but this one, sticks to that tradition, I guess. And it's an interesting grape. It's kind of like a low-acid Sangiovese. Like both of them had that sort of like leather characteristic to them typically, but these tend to be a little bit like darker fruit flavors. Again, in that Rioja. So not much else on the label here to know, except that it is a Reserva. The Reserva label, it means it's got a year in oak. In this case, it's going to be American oak, and at least 2 years of aging in the bottle. And so we're going to expect some pronounced like oaky flavors like spices, char, vanilla, and maybe something a little bready or cheesy. We'll see how that goes. So I have a glass here. And so, when I'm tasting wine, first thing you want to do is give it a good snort. And this is interesting stuff. This is not my first glass so far this evening, so I don't mean to suggest that. But in this case, it's definitely a very cherry, sort of the fruit in this. There's also a balsamic vinegar thing kind of going for it, like that umami sort of, not the vinegar part, but like the balsamic part of a balsamic vinegar. It's not subtle, but not overly pronounced either. Also getting a lot of like coffee and cloves as part of that smell. Palate. It's a medium-bodied, kind of like a rounded mouth feel. Medium tannins, nothing too harsh there. Medium to low acidity wine, maybe a little bit more acidic than I was expecting. Although I don't know why I thought it would have been lower than this. I don't have something to compare it with at the moment, so. Sometimes when you're tasting wines, you want to have two wines so you can kind of compare one against the other. It gives you a better idea of like how, say, acidic something would be, because you kind of like compare and contrast. Definitely an edgier acid though, which is nice. Still that red fruit, cherries, plums, a little jammier than I typically like to have. Definitely a dill component to this, which is a thing that the winemaker had mentioned in their materials, so that definitely carries through. As far as those oaky flavors, sometimes you hear people talk about coconut in a wine. This would be a great example of a wine that's got a little bit of a coconut sort of a background to it. You notice that as you like swallow and then breathe out, and you kind of like feel that coconut sort of flavor there in your head. Still has that coffee sort of component to it. I see that bready thing. It's got like a biscuity sort of a thing going for it, and it's a thing I would refer to as high quality ashtray. It's that like cigar ash sort of a flavor, not in an unpleasant way, but still definitely a thing that's there. And I am getting that leather a little bit in this, which is interesting. And again, that's usually something that I'd associate with the Sangiovese, but something that comes out here maybe from a tertiary flavor sort of a thing. It's a good wine. I'm probably going to give it 89 points. As far as pairing, I did it with a steak this evening. That was probably the wrong pick. I think that this would go a lot better with pork, especially like roast pork or barbecue, like a pulled pork sort of a thing, or pork loin on a barbecue. I think it's an excellent Tuesday night wine, which is why I drank it tonight. It's a little pricey for that. The Reservas start at about $25, and this is right there in that price range. Again, I'll drop the link to Astor on this. This will also go really well with comfort foods. So I think that if you're going to do pizza, hamburgers, lasagna, that kind of thing, this is a wine that would do really well in those situations. So the next wine we're going to talk about is the one that I plugged last night, and that is the 2018 Saracco Moscato D'Asti. This is a wine I had for the first time at Panorama here in Philadelphia. It's a wine bar over in Old City. And I had it with berries and cream, and it was a real interesting wine. And I ended up thinking of this wine after the fact as something that was like the perfect like wine to have with dessert. Not dessert wine. It is definitely a sweet wine, but not overly sweet. Alcohol content on this is pretty low. It's 6%, so it's going to hit you about like a beer. And then if you look at the nutrition facts and do the math, the sugars in this is about the same as a Coca-Cola. So if you're trying to figure out how sweet a thing this is, it'd be more in that range. So it's not going to be like super syrupy. It'll be a little bit lighter in body. Saracco is interesting. It got kind of an interesting story behind it. They started out making vermouth, grapes, or growing grapes for vermouth, and then moved over to another wine called it's gonna totally blows my my thinking right now. Anyway, it's more of a bulk sort of a thing. I think Moscato D'Asti, and the winemakers, when the third generation Paolo took over the winery, he wanted to get this Moscato D'Asti out to the public. It's an interesting setup because they are a relatively small producer, but for a producer of Moscato D'Asti, they're huge, probably 5 times what you would consider to be a large producer of this wine. But you're still talking like 500,000 bottles or something like that. Relatively cheap, probably like $14 a total wine, but a great wine to have alongside of desserts. I'm a big fan of it with the idea of having this with blue cheese or gorgonzola. Let's crack this open. Now, take a look at these bubbles. It's a frizzante wine, and so it is sparkling, but it's like a frizzy sparkle. So you can see it gets a little bit of that mousse, but then it eventually like dissipates very quickly. And this is going to be sort of a creamier sort of mouthfeel to this sort of a thing. I suppose like the harsher bubbles you'd get in a lot of champagnes. Yeah, so on the nose, you're getting a lot of like orange blossoms, stone fruits, probably more like peaches, and floral scents. So especially the tasting as fast as I did, it's like honeysuckle, like right in your mouth. The nose doesn't hide anything. It's definitely a sweet wine. It smells a bit like walking through a candy store. But there is an interesting spiciness to this. Almost a Grieg sort of a thing, like thyme, maybe, or dried thyme or dried sage. It is super grapey. It definitely has that kind of like grape juice sort of aspect. If you're trying to think for how sweet this is, if you think like a Welch's grape juice, it's a kind of in that band. Still stone fruit, nectarines on peaches, those sorts of things. It's very light bodied though. It's not syrupy. Real crisp acidity. Definitely like a backbone of honey. It uses the Charmat method of sparkling wine, which in this case they pull it out, they ferment it under pressure, and then they filter all the yeast out, and that helps with this particular grape. It's the Moscato Bianco, and that grape is kind of interesting. There's a hydrocarbon that has terpenes, and these terpenes they bind to the sugars. And so it ends up being a very floral, like aroma, strong aroma that comes off these grapes. But the more sugar is in the wine, the more aromatic it's going to be. And so I think it plays a lot better in a sweeter wine like this than it would in something that's a little drier. But that fast filtering means you're not going to get a lot of yeasty flavors. It's done in a steel vat, so you're not getting anything like oaky or anything off of this. Just a super clean wine. And again, I pitched this last night on Instagram. It's definitely my favorite wine to have with pumpkin pie, which again, coming up on the holidays, trying to think through like what you want to have at Thanksgiving. If you're a big pumpkin pie lover, I would hit this. It's not a dessert, a wine to do with dessert, like all desserts. I'd probably avoid it with chocolate. But you could do this also with spicy foods. It reminds me a lot of wines that I had in Australia that were designed for more of like the Asian market. So I imagine like spicy Chinese foods, spicy Indian food, that sort of thing would play really well with this. Anyway, that's the 2 wines I'm going to cover tonight. I hope you enjoyed. Please like and follow. I need those first 100 followers so I can change my URL. Appreciate your time, and we'll talk more about wine later. See ya.